Good evening. You're listening to Alchemist Radio on God FM. I'm your host, Reverend Levity. Tonight's show is about passion.
For me, it's a fire and a drive that I don't have any control over. It's a deep calling that I don't even know the origin of.
That's the voice of Tiffany Hoffman, one of the few certified practicing midwives here in Reno. 7 weeks ago, she helped me deliver my baby, and I knew she was the perfect person to talk to about passion.
You know, when you originally think of passion, you think of, people telling you to live your passion, and it's this fully positive and amazing thing, and if you are living your passion, you'll never work a day in your life, and I think that's a line of BS, to be honest, because passion isn't always pretty.
She's right about the word passion. The word passion is one of those words where the modern application appears disconnected from the original meaning. The word itself comes from the Latin root word patior, which means to suffer. Many of the modern applications of passion no longer convey the idea of suffering at all. Its present use is one describing an intense desire. The modern use also defines passion as being an irrational force that is irresistible. But when you combine the original meaning with the modern usage, what you get is a painful calling that pushes us toward growth.
So anything that's a passion, you're going to learn a lot from, and those lessons are not always easy, and sometimes they're really painful.
The goal of this sermon today is not just to wake up the passionate explorer within you in this audience tonight, but also to educate you about a movement happening that I am passionate about. A movement that is essential to the growth of our community. There's going to be some things in this live podcast you may not have known before, or maybe you do know because you've experienced it. You personally have suffered from it.
Obstetric violence is real. I've seen people, fingers are put into people's bodies, instruments are put into people's bodies, things are done to them without their knowledge or their consent, and they're talked to as if they don't matter.
I hope you learned something new tonight, brothers and sisters, and I hope you, above all, are inspired. This is the passion of the midwife. On the screen coming now is a slideshow of images taken from Googling midwifery. I do not own them.
Midwifery is a shared decision-making model of care. Differs from the medical model in the sense that it's shared decision-making. Every decision is an informed decision.
What's special about midwifery is that it honors and subverts the psychology of power happening in a typical patient-doctor relationship, even with providers who have the best of intentions.
There's a power dynamic anytime there is a relationship with someone that has more knowledge. And so the midwifery model looks to mitigate that and make sure that both people carry as much power, just in different areas. The woman is the expert on her body, and the midwife is the person who has the knowledge around natural birth and birth outside of the hospital setting.
It's important to note that though Tiffany is a white woman and that white affluent women dominate the field of midwifery today, women of color are the originators of midwifery in this country.
In the United States, all babies were delivered by granny midwives, and those were midwives of color. Very often they were slave women that caught all of the babies of the women that owned them.
There's a hidden history, y'all, to our modern OBGYN practice that no one talks about. James Marion Sims, the father of obstetrics and gynecology. He
would experiment on his female slaves without anesthesia, all the techniques that he came up with without their consent.
In this example, the suffering of women of color is a tragedy. It's not a passion. And that suffering continues today. And it's a huge part of why our culture needs midwifery. It's a part of our social justice movement. Because
if we look at the maternal mortality and infant mortality rates, ours are the highest in any developed country, especially among women of color. And those aren't women having their babies at home. Those are women having their babies in hospitals. Only 1% of births occur at home.
We live in America, yes, but our birth culture needs work, and it needs it now. In fact, Tiffany's journey into midwifery started with her own botched experience.
I literally had no idea what a big experience it was. I took a small childbirth education class through the hospital and realized that that did not prepare me in any way, shape, or form, and how could it possibly?
The traditional medical way of pregnancy and birth just doesn't seem to be covering a woman's full range of experience.
There's no talk of the mental, emotional, spiritual changes that come with it, the gravity of it, the enormity of like you changing from who you were into an entirely new person. There's still pieces of you, but your life changes forever. And came out of it with a birth experience where I felt traumatized and violated and totally disrespected.
As she began to reflect on her experience, her passion seed was planted.
You know, this cannot be birth. This cannot be what every woman has to go through to have a baby.
Sometimes in order to fix a system, you have to leave the system, even when it makes your goal that much harder.
I had all the prerequisites for pre-med, and I thought, I'm going to be the obstetrician who changes it all. I'm going to be the one inside the system. And then I had a reality check of when have I ever been that gentle person to go in and change things from the inside.
And when you don't know where your passion is taking to, a lot of times you just have to follow the signs that appear around you.
I was at this massage certification, and the other women were like, you're not an OB, you're a midwife. I had never even heard of a midwife. And I was like, well, what's a midwife? I didn't even know what a doula was.
And a lot of people don't know what a midwife or a doula is. For those of you wondering, a doula is a trained professional who provides continuous physical, emotional, and informational support to a mother before, during, and after childbirth. They're like a shepherd for the labor journey, and I would never have a child again without one. I feel like I should take a moment right now to make something very clear, a disclaimer. The midwife movement is not saying that all hospital births and medical providers are bad and that they cause bad experiences, nor are they claiming that all midwives are perfect. But the main difference between the two fields is respect.
Respect is the main ingredient in that, and it has to go both ways. Like there's a trust and a respect and a relationship, which in our traditional medical model, there's no time for.
This is a healthcare issue. It's a symptom of the flaws of our insurance-based medical system.
Because of insurance, we expect people, physicians to be seeing so many people in a day that they have 6 minutes. The average visit with an OB is 6 minutes. And I know that there are obstetricians who would love to see people for longer, and even nurse midwives in those settings don't get as much time with their patients as they'd like. And so our system is set up, to move people through a conveyor belt in a sense, and that there's no space for uniqueness, for individuality, and to look at that person's whole being in making decisions for them.
This isn't just a healthcare issue either, though. This is fundamentally a women's health issue. Hell, this is a women's life issue.
The thing that I saw, especially as a doula in the hospital setting, was obstetric violence. Our society has put women in a place where their voice is not as important, that if there is any sort of authority, that is always taken above a woman's voice. And I've watched it over and over and over. It was a violation every time. And vicarious trauma is a real and impactful thing. Like, you watch that happen to a woman, you carry a piece of it away with you always.
The pregnancy, labor, and birth experience is both a symbolic and literal representation of where any culture is at in regard to the suffering of women. As women, it is at the core of our social justice fight.
Women have to have choices. If they don't have choices, they don't have power.
To free women from their suffering, we must begin in the womb and carry that freedom until death.
Reproductive life for women is full circle, and it starts from the very beginning when they're little kids and they're learning consent, and we're forcing them to hug people they don't want to hug and talk to people that they don't want to talk to, and we're having them deny all of their intuitive sense of who they want to be around, who they don't, who makes them feel comfortable, who doesn't, and being able to voice that. It starts there.
Comprehensive sex education is just one key to female empowerment.
If you don't know about your body, if you don't know what your choices are, you don't have any.
The secret to freedom is choice. When it comes to women's health and the birth process, options, support, respect. And that's what the midwife of today is fighting for.
Only she knows what's best for her.
Whether the woman wants a scheduled C-section or a home birth, the midwife is fighting to give the birth experience that makes the mother feel alive.
So she can have her baby wherever she wants, with whomever she wants, as long as we have given her all of the information.
And that's what the midwife is suffering for.
How do midwives suffer? I miss moments with my family. I miss my daughter's performances. I've missed birthdays. I miss being present when I get home from a birth if she needs me. I have to have everything packed in a car everywhere I go because I could be called at any moment. I don't sleep soundly most nights because someone could call, and I want to make sure I'm ready, 100% ready.
And so the midwife fights. Her passion drives her forward. And that passion leads to suffering. And as Tiffany said in the beginning of this podcast, that passion is not always pretty.
The other day I was sitting in a bathroom, backed up into a corner as I was waiting for a baby to come out. We had been pushing for hours and hours. And I look over and I'm kneeling right next to a toilet brush with my head near a toilet that has blood on it. And I'm looking at someone's back end thinking how glamorous my job is. But then a few moments later, when that baby came out and that mom had that moment of bringing her baby up and saying, I did it. I didn't think I could do what I did. And I'm like, that's the moment. It's the payoff. It's what makes it all worth it.
The suffering of the midwife spans more genres than most of us can even imagine. Besides sacrificing time with their families, they spend hours upon hours with their bodies hunched in unnatural positions, and when they're not appealing disputes and jumping through hoops with insurance companies so they can get paid. By the way, insurance companies almost never pay midwives. Midwives are trying to prove themselves to a medical community who doesn't validate their expertise as health practitioners, and sometimes they don't even validate them as women.
We fight perceptions of what it is we do and what we provide and what our skill level is.
And on top of that, midwives must fight for their clients, even when those clients are disappointed because their birth experience did not go as expected. And I can tell you right now, no birth experience goes as expected.
You do give so much, and there are times when it's just not enough, and there's nothing more you could have done.
There's nothing more you could have done, because with great passion comes great responsibility.
And it brings up your own issues. Like, that's the brilliance of this profession, the difficulty, but also the brilliance. All of your stuff is triggered, and you're forced, if you're going to continue in this profession, you have to look at your stuff. You have to look at yourself in a really frank and honest way.
So, what's a passion without a dream? We must always keep in our mind where our passion is leading us. How can we create our dream if we don't even know what it is that we want to be creating?
Let's travel to this world where we live in a utopia designed by you. Can you paint a picture for what the pregnancy, the labor, and the birth looks like in this utopia?
The first piece is we have to take the shame out of it. Like, there's so much shame around, where you choose to give birth, who you choose to give birth with, whether you choose to breastfeed, whether you don't, whether you can, whether you can't, are you using the right carrier? Women are just as bad at beating themselves up as we allow society to beat us up, and we turn ourselves against each other when really the power comes from community and support, but we've never been shown that model.
So, in order to create a safe space for everyone, we need more representation in the field of midwifery.
We need to have every woman or birthing person be able to see themselves. And so what that means is, more midwives of color, more queer, transgender, whoever you identify with, there has to be somebody that you feel like sees you, that you feel truly safe with.
We also need to see a push for mental health support for women and parents on the parenthood journey.
You labor as you live. And so the stuff that you've struggled with in your life, you will struggle with during birth. And if we keep trying to deny that, we're going to end up with more people who don't have the tools to cope.
Most importantly, midwives dream of a world of collaboration.
The goal I've had since I started midwifery in 2006 is, how do we work together? How do we make this the same? Like, I may not agree with everything you do when we get there, and you don't agree with us not being there in the first place, but how do we work together, because this woman and her baby are the most important piece of this picture.
This is the world Tiffany and so many other midwives suffer for and sacrifice for. It's the passion of the midwife. And just as the passion of the Christ paved the way to freedom for our souls, happy Easter, by the way, the passion of the midwife paves the way for freedom of the feminine.
I call it the midwifery cliff. and you stand at the edge, and you know that it might possibly be amazing, and it might possibly end in your death in a way, because you look at it and you know that there are parts of your life that will die if you choose it, because it requires so much of you.
So I ask you, what's your midwifery cliff? What are you here on this earth to midwife into existence? What baby are you meant to catch? What cause are you meant to sacrifice for? What calling can no amount of suffering stop you from pursuing? Brothers and sisters, assume God has a passion for you. Maybe it doesn't involve being backed into a corner next to toilet brushes surrounded by bodily fluids, constantly sacrificing your own health and relationship for a cause. But there is a fire inside of you, summoning you to do the work. You are in your own way a midwife. And most certainly, you are an alchemist. This has been The Passion of the Midwife. You're listening to Alchemist Radio on God FM.